I'm taking this week on the Church Answers podcast with the 3 episodes we have to look at 3 of my books that became #1 bestsellers. If you listened or watched on YouTube the other ones, Autopsy of Deceased Church and Simple Church, you know that I had a little bit of concern by talking about my books in such a bragging type of way. Even if I try to make it look like humble boast, no matter what I do, it's me talking about my book. And so for that, I have a bit of discomfort, but at the same time, I'm over it. The main reason I'm over it is because these books so well because they help the church. That just gets me excited. Okay, maybe I'm boasting too much about my own books, but these books help the church. And I want to look at, I've written 42 books. I've had a number of them in the top 25, top 15, top 10, a lot of them in the top 100, but these 3 hit #1. To have one book just hit in the top 25 in the course of a lifetime is a pretty big deal. For God to bless me with 3 books at #1 is beyond description of how blessed I am. But I want to talk about it from the perspective of a church. I started with Simple Church. Simple Church was written 18 years ago, and it's still a very popular book because its principles are great. I talked about Autopsy of a Deceased Church, a 12-year-old book. Now I'm going to look at my more recent #1 bestseller, but it's still 11 years ago, and it's called I Am a Church Member. Was I surprised that this book became a #1 bestseller? Was I surprised that this book became my best-selling book of all time? Well, I'll give you the answer in just a minute. Before we get there, thank you, Cheney and Associates, the accounting firm for the church. Hear me well. You don't need to be doing your bookkeeping. You don't need to be doing your taxes. You don't need to be doing all that yourself in the church. Cheney and Associates is the accounting firm for the church. They've helped over 1,100 churches over 21 years. They're cloud-based. They have everything you need. They help small churches, church plants to mega churches. They've got you covered. You don't need to be doing that in your church. Get a specialist that does this for churches all the time. That's why they're the accounting firm for the church. Thank you, Steve Cheney. Thank you to all the people at Cheney and Associates. I am a church member, looking at 3 books that became #1 bestsellers. Was I surprised? The answer is yes and no. Okay, that's ambivalent. Before I wrote the blog post on it, I would have never dreamed that either the blog post or the book would be so well received. Here was the story. I was writing 3 blog posts a week back in the days when the blogosphere was still really, really hot. Still a good place to get a lot of content, but people first came into the blogosphere, it was just blowing up all over the place, and it was something that everybody wanted to be a part of. So I got into that back on my website back in those days. ThomRainer.com is now ChurchAnswers.com. And I was writing 3 a day. That was a chore. Because in addition to that, I was doing 2 podcasts a week. Oh, yeah. Well, now I'm doing 10 a week, but that's another story. But it was a chore to write something original that could help churches and church leaders every couple of days or 3 times a week. But I did. But I had brain freeze one night, and my blog post was due the next morning. My team worked with me well. They didn't sweat it. If they didn't have anything for me that night when they went home from work, they were confident that when they woke up at 6 a.m. that I would have had it done, and they would get it posted and put up. They put up with my schedule, with my last minute types of actions and publications. And that was the case then. I let them know that. I let some of my team members in. I'm just having a brain freeze right now. I'll promise you'll have it when you wake up at 6 in the morning, but I don't know if I'm going to get it before then. So I was trying to say, what is it I need to communicate to the churches? What is it that can help them? Quite frankly, I didn't come up with a good idea. And I don't know where I got this idea, but I just said, I'm just going to drill down a few words about what it means to be a church member. This should be a throwaway post. Who's going to read about what I am a church member is? So I wrote 450 words, if I remember correctly, close to that. That's small. That's very few words. And it's called I'm a Church Member, and I wrote out what it meant to be a church member. I said, "Oh my gosh, this one will get no traffic." But when you write over 150 articles a year, you're not going to have all home runs. So I went to bed thinking nothing about it. Sent it in. It just so happens that one of my team members was up early in the morning, 2 or 3, and they decided to go and post it. By about 7 a.m., I got a call from one of my team members. He said, "Are you tracking your blog?" I said, "No, what are you talking about?" He said, "We have never seen anything like this." And within about 2 days, over 1 million people had read it, and it didn't slow down for some time. I have never seen anything like that. Why that went as viral as it did shocked me, that blog post. Well, that's very similar to what happened with Autopsy, but this one was even more so. Autopsy of the Deceased Church, a book that I mentioned in the previous podcast. This one even more so. In fact, it's almost at 2 million total right now, but most of it came in the early days. Yet here's what's happening. It's having a new life too. It's starting to just go again. And the publisher said, this thing's going so well, let's at least put a new cover on it. So just got my new cover, and this is a book that's 11 years old and is still going strong. What is it about I am a church member that I need to tell you, the church leader or church member? Why is it that this is probably going to be the number one bestseller in practical church ministry of all books ever? That's an amazing statement. I think the big reason was we had dumbed down so much about what it means to be a part of the church, the local church, that when someone finally voiced to be a church member is to be a contributing member. That's just 1 Corinthians 12. And here's how you should. It was a voice that had not been heard in a while, at least the way I did it. And so I Am a Church Member became this incredibly hot-selling book that helped churches work with their church members to define what it means to be a church member. I cannot tell you how many church members have come up to me when I speak in conferences and say this, similar to this: "Thom, when I read I Am a Church Member, I realized that I was not committed to the local church. I was in it for what I wanted. It was all about me, myself, and I. It was about my personal preferences, my music style. And I read that book, and you gave a biblical basis for what it means to actually contribute, serve, and to be a part of the giving part, not just financial, but in all ways of a local church." And I guess it was just that wake-up call that I did not realize was so latent that just burst out onto the scene with I Am a Church Member. And let me tell you, that book today is still a very good selling book, even 11 years later. Again, I give you that not because I want to tell you how wonderful I am as an author, though it might sound that way. I want to tell you what God has done with the book. And I've known churches that would buy copies of this book for their entire membership, and they would say, "It has revolutionized our church." And here's the good news. I keep hearing it today. So I've taken this week of podcasts to go through the egotistical pathway of talking about my 3 number one best-selling books: Simple Church, Autopsy of the Deceased Church, and I Am a Church Member. But I hope in the context of talking about these 3 books that I've given you a new insight into what they did for the local church. And if you haven't read them, I encourage you to read them. We got them all of them in the show notes. So, go look at them, jump at them, and you will appreciate them. I think. I hope I haven't overstated my case. Hey, thank you for putting up with me. I enjoyed going down memory lane for my 3 number one best-selling books. Thanks for just going alongside me in it. And I pray that these books, if they haven't been helpful to you already in your church, that you will find that they can be. As always, hey, you YouTube folks, give us a rating or review. No, that's the podcast folks. You podcast app folks, give us a rating and review. You YouTube folks, subscribe. See how old I am? I'm getting it backwards. Give us a subscribe or give us a thumbs up. Particularly appreciate both of those because we're fairly new in our YouTube channel. We're trying to grow it, and any help that you can give us would be greatly appreciated. Once again, thank you for being a part of the Church Answers podcast. Got 2 more that we've already downloaded for you on my other 2 books. You can look or hear them later. As always, appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.